Okay, perfect. We are around 60 people online, which is a very good number to start with. Yes, and dear all, I hope you can hear me. So please just wave, and also you can wave to each other and say hi, at least with muted. Yes, in muted mode. Nice to see you all. I also just clicked through the pages on Zoom and it's really exciting. Yes, so dear all, on behalf of the European Youth Parliament Network, I would like to welcome you to the event Youth Demands on Climate and Energy in the times of the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Helena Neb and I work as a project manager in EYP for the project Power Shift Reflect Europe's Energy. We run this project in cooperation with E.ON Foundation since 2015. By the way, Managing Director of the E.ON Foundation, Stefan Muschik, is together with us. Hello, Stefan. Extra hello for you. Power Shifts project enables around 3,500 young people from 40 European countries to inform themselves, discuss, and propose solutions for future energy policies. Today, we're here to get into conversation with speakers representing business, politics, and science about youth demands on climate and energy. Let me warmly welcome also a group of enthusiastic young people who are hosting this event, Young Europe Ambassadors, who joined the meeting with all ministers of European affairs of the EU member states in December 2020, and they presented their claims on Europe's future. Today, we'll talk about the demands they have formulated for the future of climate and energy policies. And now I will give the floor to our moderator of the evening, and that's Federico Barbieri, who is a Young Europe Ambassador from Italy. He's a renewable energy engineer, and he's currently serving as SDG7 Youth Constituency as regional focal point for Europe, which is the official engagement mechanism for young people in UN processes focused on energy topics. His current efforts are focused on the foundation of the European Youth Energy Network. Federico, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Helena. Thank you for your kind introduction. I hope you can hear me clearly. If not, please stop me. It is a pleasure for me and an honor to be your moderator today. And so without further hesitation, allow me to introduce the agenda of today's online event. The event will be divided into three main parts. Following the ice-breaking activity, we will first introduce the Young Europe Ambassadors Policy Recommendation for Climate and Energy, an ambitious paper that aims to contribute to the dialogue between European decision makers and civil society, as envisioned by the Conference on the Future of Europe and the European Climate Pact. Secondly, we will have the honor to welcome three distinguished speakers that will inspire us with their keynotes. Our special guests for today are Dr. Johannes Teyssen, the CEO of E.ON, Dr. Cathy Maguire, expert from the European Environment Agency, and Michael Bloss, member of the European Parliament. A Q&A session with our special guests will follow, so make sure you have your question ready. Thirdly, you will also have the opportunity to join a breakout room to network with the other participants, comment on the panel debate, and give your feedback on Young Europe Ambassadors Policy Recommendation, and generally to reflect on the discussion. To facilitate the subdivision, we kindly ask you to rename yourself according to the scheme posted in the chat. So, Elena, you posted the list. And so if you're in the chat, you should see the breakout room list. And all you need to do is to right click on your name, select rename, and add your breakout room keyword. For example, in my case, I rename myself as Federico YEA, Young Europe Ambassador, but you can rename yourself, for example, as Federico _engagement or leadership. A quick reminder, please only use your first name when naming yourself on Zoom. We want to make sure that your identity is safe. The event is live streamed and recorded for future spread on social media. While our participants are renaming themselves, let me remind you that our event is interactive and we'll be using Menti to collect your inputs and questions. So I kindly ask Elena to post the Menti link in the chat. And also the number to join. Perfect, thank you. Thank you so much, Elena. So to kick off our session, let's test first your ability with Menti. So I will kindly invite you to insert the code and check out the first question. So Elena, if you could please share the screen in the meantime. And one technical remark, we have made everything we could to prepare the meeting, but sometimes computers and IT networks behave in unexpected ways. If such spontaneous problems occur today, we ask for your patience. So I see that some people are already answering the first question, which is, which city are you currently based in? I will leave you a few seconds. We see many people from Berlin. I think Berlin is the leading country, someone from Dubai. So it's not only European people connecting from Europe. I see people from Brussels, from Sofia, from Athens. So I think there's a great diversity, and from Paris, from Lisbon, from Eindhoven. That's great. I really hope we will be able to connect all this information and to count the number of countries, the number of nationalities that we have today. So I think we can move to the second question. So we want to see the age range of our participant. So what is your year of birth? And now we will find out who's the youngest and who's the oldest person connected today. The C is quite complicated to keep track of the numbers, but I would do my best. I see someone from 2004. That's impressive. And someone from 1993, 1991. Most people are from 1995, 1997, 1994. I think that's great diversity. Perfect. Let's move into the next last question. We all know that among motivated participants, there is always a thriving network of European international organizations. So which climate-focused network are you part of? If you, okay, I see that some people are from Yango, from E.ON Foundation, from ITRE, from Climate Yes Europe, Climate Cleanup Foundation. That's indeed a great diversity. And if you are not part of any organization so far, I will encourage you to check out and maybe consider joining the European Parliament or any of these of the organizations that appear on the screen. Thank you, Elena. I think we can now move to the next stage. So thank you all for your contribution. And it's finally time to move to the first point of our agenda, the Young Europe Ambassadors Policy Recommendation Paper on Climate and Energy. And who could be the ideal person to introduce this paper if not a young European ambassador? I'm therefore glad to introduce to you Victoria Sack. Victoria is a young Europe ambassador from Germany. She's currently finishing her bachelor's degree in biotechnology at the TU Berlin, and she has been an active member of IUP Germany for the last 6 years. Whoa, congratulations, Victoria. So the floor is yours. You have now 5 minutes, and we are all curious to know more about the policy recommendation paper. I don't hear Victoria.
Yeah, but you should hear me now?
Yeah, and we can also see your screen. So also
wonderful. That would have been my next question. I'm sure that you've all had an extensive look at our policy recommendations on climate and energy that were shared with you with the invitation and also the Zoom link. But just in case you've already forgot something about them again, I'd like to refresh your knowledge by this presentation. At first, I wanted to draw the attention of you to our mission statement that revolves around the sustainable carbon neutral EU, and soon, not only by 2050, as a recommendation passed by the European Parliament last week demands. The timeline from the European Parliament worries us, actually, as we believe we are the last generation to effectively tackle climate change, and not our children or grandchildren. Our voice, as well as other relevant stakeholders such as scientists, should be given more weight in the decision-making process. And I believe that today's event is a good step in the correct direction. Us 7 Young Europe ambassadors covered 8 distinct topics. And within the next few minutes, I would like to point out our main recommendations. So firstly, we believe that the EU needs to show global leadership in regard to a sustainable future and explicitly integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into the European Green Deal. And secondly, as far as sustainability and coherent policy making go, we want to ensure that all EU policies, especially those revolving around energy or land use, are in line with the EU environmental goals and follow an ecosystem approach. In case you're unfamiliar with the term ecosystem-based approach, it basically just means a strategy for the integrated management of land, water, and living resources that promotes conservation and sustainable use in a just way. And thirdly, we fear that our member states are energy dependent on other countries, and therefore we want to support the energy exchange between member states. We want to do this by eliminating barriers, for example, when obtaining building permits or grid access, and to implement a pan-European green energy scheme. And to make the transition to renewable energies just, we believe that the existing retraining schemes for workers in non-renewable energy sectors are not sufficient, and further development and funding of retraining schemes is necessary. Fourthly, as is partly done today, collaboration between non-governmental organizations, civil society, and research institutes needs to be increased to ensure everyone is given ownership and responsibility in reaching the energy transition as well as climate justice. But what does this mean in practice? Well, in regard to agriculture, the current Common Agricultural Policy, abbreviated as CAP, needs to be updated to be in line with the European Green Deal, especially to support farmers in the transition towards the new food system. In regards to oceans, the EU finally needs to adopt an international agreement to significantly reduce oceans and sea pollution, stop overfishing, and ban destructive seabed activities. And in regards to plastic, there is a need for a ban of all crude oil-based plastic items in the foreseeable future, as are subsidies for further research and production of bioplastics. And finally, we hope to be able to travel throughout Europe from Lisbon to Budapest using a true high-speed, high-quality, modern rail system, which doesn't cost more than current, or 2019, you know, when you could still travel, air travel. Hopefully this presentation gave you a rough overview of the different policy areas that need revision according to hundreds of students across Europe who discuss these topics in the frame of the PowerShifts project, but most importantly, according to us, 7 Young Europe ambassadors that have prepared and organized this event throughout the last 3 months. Apart from Federico, Emma, and myself, there are Sam, Norbert, Henrik, and Benjamin, who you'll have the opportunity to get to know as hosts of the breakout rooms later tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for your great summary. So I think you can see the paper. Elena will kindly ask you to post the link to the paper in the chat. And I encourage you to absorb the main takeaways of the policy recommendation and to still consult the paper in the link posted in the chat. And I encourage you to open it and save it for later, as you will need it when discussing it in your breakout room. So, Elena, I don't know if you have posted it already, but you should see it in the chat. Perfect. Thank you so much, Elena. It's now my pleasure to pass the baton to my colleague, Ema Odra Raščan, who will have the challenging task to moderate the upcoming panel discussion. A few words to introduce her. Ema is a young Europe ambassador from Slovenia, currently finishing her bachelor's degree in international relations at the University of Ljubljana. In 2020, she completed her internship at the European Parliament. She's a columnist for the European Student Think Tank, and she works for the Slovenian American Education Foundation. The floor is yours, Ema. We're all curious to know more about the upcoming speakers.
Hi, I hope that we can hear each other, and greetings from sunny Ljubljana. Well, so thank you so much for the floor, Federico. And before we kick off our panel discussion with our honorable guests, let me just highlight how the Q&A session will be carried out, so you have that in mind. There will be two options. One option is that you use the raise hand button, and then you can ask your question live or a bit more personally. But there will also be the opportunity to use Menti, so the platform where we posted questions before, you will be able to use now to post your questions anonymously. So if that is something that you prefer, it's definitely a chance to do so. And we will make sure to keep an eye out for both, the raise hand suggestions and the Menti questions. So we'll try to really do this as smoothly as possible. Okay, now without further ado, let me introduce our first panel speaker of the evening, and that is Dr. Johannes Teyssen. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer of E.ON, an international energy company focused on smart grids and customer solutions to drive the energy transition in Europe. Dr. Teyssen holds a doctorate in law from the University of Göttingen and has held leading roles in a number of energy sector organizations and associations, such as Euroelectric and the World Energy Council. And it is an absolute pleasure to be able to host him today as our keynote speaker. And Dr. Teyssen, I invite you, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Emma. I should say, everybody has been a young leader at once, but obviously that is a situation that passes by with time. So I'm quite thankful for the kind invitation to the round, and I studied the work that you provided, and I'm quite impressed about the breadth and the depth of your paper. The last first message is that I appreciate that the E.ON Stiftung was able to support your work since 2015 and is going to continue that. And I definitely hope that both sides will profit and learn from this important relationship. I decided to focus on three messages in the time you provided to me, issues that I believe are of utmost importance to facilitate a sustainable energy and climate policy for the next generation. First, COVID is obviously the issue of today, and it consumes most time. However, a successful climate abatement policy and a successful delivery on the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations is the overriding issue of our and your generation. And if we don't win that, I think even battling COVID will not do the trick. Obviously, that means that we as mankind need to deliver against the Paris pledges. There is no second Paris. We need to deliver against the pledges we all did. This will only be possible if we can prove that a climate neutral society is possible, which is still just and socially equitable, and that we prove that we can square these three tangles at the same time until 2050 the latest. Obviously, and that is a high focus, producing clean and affordable energy is at the heart of all solutions. But that only matters if we can bring clean power and clean gas to the people, and if we can make mobility, heating and cooling of buildings and all industrial processes clean. Otherwise, just providing clean energy is not doing the trick. I believe that this will be the most difficult stuff. Cleaning energy is much easier than cleaning the application of energy in all other solutions. And we should not forget that that is where the thing matters. We as E.ON strive to be leaders on the clean energy and the clean society equation based on our superior energy infrastructure, where we bring the clean energy to the houses, to the buildings, to the towns and villages across Europe, and translate them into clean solutions, accessible for customers and clients, and making their life more livable and more successful. Already today, we have one of the very lowest direct greenhouse gas exposures as any utility, just a very few single-digit millions. More importantly, we help society to avoid last year only 100 million tons of CO2. So our direct so-called scope 1 and 2 exposures are neglectable against what we strive to do for our clients. Second message, climate abatement is obviously a must, but we need to provide it in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals of the EU. And rightfully, therefore, the EU has defined its taxonomy in a way that it squares climate with the other sustainability goals. We will only be able to provide a successful transition if we involve civil society and if we let the people do the decisions. If we try to do a top-down with top-down enforced solutions, we will lose the people and we will not deliver against it sustainably. And therefore, all solutions need to be affordable for the people. And they need to allow that we have proper and fair paid jobs. And this will only be possible if we have competitive industries and businesses for the next generation. We have done extensive research about civil involvement on the one hand and fairness of burden sharing on the other hand. And we found time and time again that this is what the people want. They don't trust politicians alone. They want to get involved and they want to see that their voice matters and that burdens, unavoidable burdens, are fairly, and they doubt that. My third and last message, the biggest challenge in implementation is that society always needs to deal with multiple issues. In democracies, that takes continuous balancings of interests and continuous negotiations with all stakeholders involved. Sometimes the delivery, therefore, appears to be slow and unfocused, but that's the price of democracy. But if we do it right and based on the trust of people and their involvement, then any outcome is also much more secured than just enforcement from the top. Therefore, we need to set priorities as a society, but we cannot and shall not sacrifice other issues of so-called lesser importance. And we need to create a society that therefore can and will stand for far-reaching change and for such a fundamental transition. Such change takes openness for new technologies and true innovation. It takes the openness and the willingness to see risks as opportunities and the willingness to embrace entrepreneurship for something new instead of defending the old above new. And I warn you, as an aging part of this society, in an aging and overall wealthy European society like ours, this takes almost a cultural revolution. And it needs to be spearheaded by the younger generation. And you need to be prepared for fighting for that cultural change. And you should not even underestimate how deep the cultural heritage of protecting the past is likely deeply embedded even already in your own DNA. And therefore, be ready for cultural change, because that's a fundamental basis of climate change and a fair and just and equitable climate-aligned society of the next generation to come. We as E.ON are willing to help as much as we can through the Stiftung, also providing the support for the cultural debate that is unavoidable. Thank you for the time, and I'm looking forward for questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Teyssen, for those.
It's Johannes. It's Johannes. I'm not a doctor. Thank you.
Well, as you said, there is truly a need for each of us to push forward the Paris pledges and to prove that a zero carbon lifestyle is possible. And it is especially motivating to hear how the E.ON is helping bring sustainability to people. And for me, I will especially take away your quote that we must have willingness to see risks as an opportunity, which is, all too, which we see now in our everyday lives also. And well, let me present the second speaker of the evening, and that is Dr. Cathy Maguire, who works in the Integrated Assessment for Sustainability program at the European Environmental Agency, EEA, focusing on environmental accounting, food system analysis, and learning and development. Her responsibilities include being the lead author of the State and Outlook for the European Environment reports. Prior to joining the EEA in 2011, she trained as an ecologist, worked in academia, the private sector, and civil society, and was a co-founder and chair of Friends of the Earth Ireland. Dr. Maguire, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight, and it's a delight to have you here, so the floor is all yours.
Okay, thanks, Emma, and it's just Cathy as well. At the EEA, our main role is to provide sound and independent information on the environment to both the policymakers and the general public. And part of our mandate is to deliver an assessment of the state and outlook for Europe's environment every 5 years. And we call this SWR. And this assessment is intended to support policy and decision making at both European and national levels, particularly the EU's Environment Action Programmes. So we published the last one, SWR 2020, and it informed the European Green Deal and now the proposal for the 8th Environment Action Programme. So I actually wanted to start by placing your recommendations in the context of what we concluded as areas for action and the way forward for Europe. So in terms of some of our key conclusions on SWR 2020, were that Europe is really facing persistent environmental challenges of unprecedented scale and urgency, and we include climate change within that. And while we've seen a lot of progress on things like reducing specific emissions and pollutants and some particular impacts on human health, the longer term outlook is not really encouraging, and the type of improvements, particularly efficiency improvements that we've seen, are really going to be insufficient to meet these longer term sustainability objectives and goals to 2050. And these persistent challenges tend to have certain characteristics, and they are a bit resistant to some of the traditional policy responses. So to really try and address them, we need to address these in broader sustainability context, looking at the links and relationships between the environmental, social, economic and governance dimensions, and also what's happening at national, European and global scales, because all of these things are intertwined. And so this requires us to actually look at how policies, investments and knowledge work together and can be brought together to really transform what we would say these key societal systems that are driving our unsustainability. So food, mobility, energy, built environment. And we need to do this in a way in which we're trying to maximize the environmental, social and economic co-benefits, but also try and deal with trade-offs, because there will be conflicts and trade-offs. So how do we deal with these in a transparent way? Because what we're talking about here is real system and systemic change, and we know that's disruptive. And so it's not just about what we need to do, but it's also about what we need to stop doing. And this can often be more difficult because it challenges some vested interests, it challenges established structures. And so within SWR, what we tried to do was identify some key areas for action. And I wanted to see how your climate and energy recommendations really align with our assessment outcomes. And I think there's a lot of coherence between your recommendations and the type of things that we are highlighting and analysing. And the mission statement in your document really, I think it captures the core of our reflections, both spirit and content. Because in SWR, we highlighted 7 real areas that we thought were fundamental action needed to happen over this next decade. The first is really around strengthening policy implementation, integration and coherence. This has been talked about at a European level for about 40 years. Now we actually need to start doing it and just stop talking about it and actually make it happen, particularly around coherence. that we need to complement what we have already with these more systemic long-term policy frameworks that address systems and have binding targets. That we need to provide leadership on international action towards sustainability. That we need to have policies that foster innovation across society. Policy needs to take on a slightly different role. You can't control these things in a top-down way. It needs to become an enabler of action across society. We need to scale up the level of investments we have and try and reorientate finance. And we need to manage risks to ensure a socially fair transition, because as Johannes emphasised in his intervention, these are societal-wide processes, so people need to buy into it and they need to be seen as just as well. And because we're EEA, I mean, we always have to have something around knowledge. So for us, it's around actually ensure that we link knowledge to action and stop seeing this process almost where somebody produces knowledge and then somebody's meant to act on it. You know, these things are one holistic kind of process, and we need to involve those that we want to act in how we actually produce the knowledge that informs their decisions. And I see a lot of this all reflected in your recommendations to different extents, obviously, but and I wanted to put it in this broader sustainability context because I think your recommendations also go beyond energy and climate to address these broader sustainability and wider issues as well. So as we look ahead, I mean, we now have a new policy landscape in place in Europe in the form of the European Green Deal and now the proposal for 8th Environmental Action Programme. I mean, these developments are very encouraging. There's a lot more ambition. We see a more systemic approach reflected and a stronger focus on policy coherence. But at the moment, it's language, it's rhetoric, it's there. We still need to see a lot of how this would be achieved. You know, the devil is always in the detail. So for us, it's way too early to begin to assess the likely outcomes of things. I mean, that would be something that we would do when we come to our next big SVR for 2025. But looking across your energy and climate recommendations, I mean, some of these are also recommendations that are made by others. So I would like to highlight 4 areas that really struck me that you addressed, where I think you can really bring an important and different perspective, and where developing these further could really add value. I mean, the first is around this issue of intergenerational equity. I mean, we're nearly 50 years on from the first UN conference on the human environment, so Stockholm in 1972, and nearly 35 years on from the Brundtland Commission, the publication of Our Common Future, and the first attempt to define sustainable development. And despite all these decades of activity, we're now more unsustainable than we were back then. But central to this first definition of sustainable development was the concept of intergenerational equity. So that's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I mean, we see that still a bit in Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, but with less emphasis. And then this term doesn't even appear in things like the European Green Deal and the 8th Environmental Action Programme. And actually at EEA in the past years, I mean, we see now much greater demand for knowledge about responses and solutions. I mean, people just don't want more detailed analysis of the problems. You know, you need to tell, our kind of assessments need to give reasons to act and then options for action. And so as we try to transform systems and transition to a more sustainable society, as I said, many of these responses and solutions will involve conflicts and trade-offs, and they can't be controlled in a top-down way, and some outcomes will be unforeseen and unintended, but we can see from history and experience that many negative social and environmental outcomes of policy interventions are both foreseeable and avoidable. I mean, you could say that the prevailing approach in Europe to date has been to pursue economic growth and then manage the negative social and economic consequences with other types of policy interventions. But that's not really the way forward if we want to strengthen policy coherence and achieve these sustainability goals. So while policy sets out goals, there are many different potential pathways on how we could achieve these, and choosing these options are political decisions, but how we evaluate these potential responses is important. And in the European Green Deal, we've got this context of this first do no harm oath. And a lot of the discussion at the minute about trade-offs is really focused on those that are occurring across policy areas. And there's very little mention of this whole concept of intergenerational equity. I mean, personally, I don't think a sustainable solution is one that shifts the burden either to others or across generations. So when I think about how can we properly integrate considerations around intergenerational equity into this policy process, I think you have a really important role to play here to make sure that this is not a secondary consideration, really, because at the moment I don't see it really having the emphasis that it really should have if we are talking about sustainable development. And so related to this is the second area, really, which is around strengthening these longer term perspectives in policy and decision making. Because what we see now, I mean, you see it very much in the climate domain, we're developing more longer term objectives and targets. And now with the European Green Deal, there's a growing role for foresight in the policy process. So looking at more forward-looking information, how we can use scenarios and things like that to help inform the type of responses and improve the kind of resilience of society. But how we think about time and what 2050 or even 2080 means is very different, I think, depending on what stage of life you're at or where you expect to be in 2050 or 2080. And this influences things like the types of scenarios that you would develop, the types of pathways that we develop, the priorities that you might give to different aspects, and also understanding of urgency, I think is different depending on, can be very different depending on age and on where you think you might be in the pathway to 2050 and beyond. And so here again, I think you could have a very important role to play to ensure that developments actually reflect these multiple perspectives, including youth, as this will lead to a different outcome than if scenarios and pathways were just developed by my generation and older, because we do bring different perspectives around time to the table. And I mean, this takes me to my third area, meaningful engagement. You highlight that in the paper, and this all requires meaningful engagement. I mean, your recommendations highlight the need to ensure meaningful and legitimate youth engagement that's independent, and to avoid tokenism when engaging not just with youth, but with other sections of society and marginalised groups. And I think this is absolutely fundamental. I mean, I remember a discussion we were having with civil society organisations on SVR, and one of the participants was talking about why there was this continued failure to achieve biodiversity goals. I mean, we say we want no net loss by 2010, don't achieve it, so kick it out to 2030. It'll now get kicked out to 2020. Now, you know, it wasn't met, the goal extended to 2030. And one of the things they highlighted that when these objectives and targets were developed, particularly for sectors, there was no meaningful engagement in some cases with these sectors. So there was no sense of ownership of them or feeling that you wanted to contribute to achieving these outcomes. So I think as we develop plans, policies focused around implementation to deliver current ambitions, we need plans that put us on these pathways to the right pathways to achieving long-term goals, not ones that lock us into dead-end streets, which means we can make some progress, but we may never achieve these longer-term 2050 goals. I mean, when we think about 2050, my generation will have retired from their working lives by then, so it's your generation who will be taking these forward. So it's essential, I think, that you have involvement in their development. And in addition, when we talk about sustainability transitions, these are societal-wide processes. Policy plays an important role, but it's not the only player here. So it needs to be an enabler. So we need much broader participation, and it needs to go beyond consultation into thinking about real, genuine co-creation processes. And so really that finally I want to highlight one last area that you also touch on, which is knowledge and skills. I mean, your recommendations address things like the need for school curricula to cover climate change and its prevention, to invest in development of education programs fit for the digital age and access to digital tools, and also making this link to the just transition through provision of retraining schemes. I mean, in SVR, we highlight how really achieving sustainability transitions requires diverse types of knowledge. It requires us to complement what we have with new knowledge. We need to be drawing on multiple disciplines, doing real interdisciplinary work, and doing different types of knowledge production that the kind of business as usual won't get us there. So we will also need to develop new skills and foster innovation throughout society. And again, I think youth involvement is very crucial here, because what we're essentially saying we need to do is build capacity to navigate in a rapidly changing world. And that involves investment, not just in education, but also lifelong learning, research and development and skills. I mean, and we can see this to link back then to COVID-19. I mean, I think here we see what we've been living through in this last year really highlights this connection between nature, society, and how societal resilience is dependent on the environment. But what I think it also does is it demonstrates that there is a capacity to act when there's a real will to want to do so. And another thing that we talk about sometimes is this VUCA word. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that was very much the world that people had to respond within when we think about COVID, where there was only partial knowledge, a lot of uncertainty, and still decisions and actions need to be made. And the same thing applies to a lot of sustainability challenges and things related to climate. There are areas where there's a lot of certainty, and there's areas where there's still uncertainty about outcomes. So I think for me, the COVID experience shows that it can be done, you know, and that partial knowledge is not necessarily mean that you cannot act. So just to conclude, I mean, if we look ahead to this future of Europe, I think we've got this window to address these sustainability challenges, particularly on climate and energy, if we want to achieve transformative change. But I think we will make more progress and put in place a better foundation for future action with your involvement and with broader participation. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing from you in the questions and discussion a bit more about how we could do this together. So, thanks.
Thank you so much for your speech. Well, you have highlighted how important an interdisciplinary approach is, and that change must be systemic and systematic. And you also repeated how important this bottom-up approach is, like Johannes did before. So I hope that our audience is feeling as inspired as myself after these speeches. And before I give my words to Mr. Michael Bloss, who has joined us in the meantime, let me just remind our listeners very fast that the Q&A session will be happening after our third keynote speech, so after Mr. Bloss. So just remember that you can go on Menti already now and type your questions there, or just write them down and then do the hand raise option, which is via Zoom. All right, now, last but not least, I would like to invite Mr. Michael Bloss to the floor. Mr. Bloss is a German member of the European Parliament. He is affiliated with the Greens European Free Alliance Parliamentary Group and currently serves in ITRE, so the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, as well as ENVI, so the Committee on Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. He has an education background in community service, international relations, and globalization and development. He has been an active political and community activist, particularly so in matters relating to the environment and climate change. And now, Mr. Bloss, the floor is all yours. And once again, hello from the audience and from myself and the Young Europe ambassadors.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and hello to everyone. Young leaders or future leaders, or how should I address you? And well, it was quite interesting when I listened to you, Cathy. In 2009, I was part of the delegation to the climate conference in Copenhagen. And we asked the question, we had basically the slogan of us, we were the youth delegation, was, how old will you be in 2050? And that's now 12 years ago. And as you said, we know basically since around 40 years that the climate crisis is happening, and not a lot has been done. And that's really a little bit bitter to conclude. But I think that also shows clearly that it's not about you being future leaders, but you need to be leaders now. You need to be leaders in this moment, because apparently until now, our leaders were not able to actually get us on track to stop the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is here. It's not somewhere like in 2050. The climate crisis is actually happening now. Right now, the deserts are growing. You know, even in the country where I come from Germany, in my region, we had sandstorms 2 years ago, and the wine that we're used to grow here, we cannot grow it anymore. Now we have to use a more southern wine to grow there. So this is happening, and basically, if we look at science, there is possibilities that we reach the 1.5 temperature goal already in 2023 or 2024. So it's no time to waste. Actually, it's already a little bit too late. So let's not discuss about 2050. Let's discuss about what is happening tomorrow, what is happening today, what is happening in 5 years, what is happening in 10 years. I think this is the most important things. And the change has to come soon. And yeah, it will come soon because people have it as an existential crisis already. And I think that's something that we learned from the movements that we saw from the Fridays for Future movements, that for us, even more so for your generation, the climate crisis is something that will affect your life heavily. And therefore, decisions need to be done now. And on the European level, we are going in this direction. I'm not sure, you discussed, I guess, a lot about the Green Deal. I'm also negotiating the European climate law, and I think we tried a little bit to show in which direction it can go. What we from the European Parliament introduced is different dimensions. One is listen to science. I think it's absolutely important that we, as the politicians or as the leaders, are really well informed by science, and listen to them and actually understand that these processes are happening, and that it's now the time to act. If we act in 10 years, it's too late already. So what we did is we introduced a CO2 budget for the European Union, because for the climate, it doesn't really matter if you are climate neutral in 2020 or 2050 or in 2080. What matters is how much CO2 do you actually emit to the atmosphere, because the atmosphere reacts to the CO2. So we have to calculate with CO2 budgets instead of some far away goals, when all of the current leaders are not anymore in their position. Second is that we introduced a European a science panel where scientists, like it's already happening in the UK or in France, are actually giving every day, every year recommendations to politicians. Where are we currently with our policies? Is that actually in line with what is left in the carbon budget? So that it's obvious what is happening, is obvious what has to be done. Another dimension is, I think, as in this situation where we are right now with the climate crisis, we need to think differently about what are actually our rights, what are human rights, what are basic freedoms. For many already now, but also for our generations, our basic freedoms we will not be able to enjoy them as much as we can do it right now, if we don't do anything against the climate crisis. So the right to a healthy environment and the right to a healthy planet is something that we need to foster. And I think it's one of the it can be one of the key things of this generation to establish this kind of new right, a right to a healthy environment and a right to a healthy climate. And this is already happening. In France, there has been now 2 court cases where activists went in front of the courts and asked to have better environmental regulation, better environmental and climate laws, because the current ones are not fit for purpose, and they are not ensuring the safety of their future. And the same is happening in the Netherlands. And I think it is something that it has to be brought much more to the table. And we try to get it into the European climate law by making sure that normal citizens and NGOs can go in front of national courts and get their governments to court if they are not abiding by their own climate plans, which many of them do not. And another thing is the end of the fossil subsidies. We know that the climate crisis is happening, and still every year in Europe, 137 billion euros go into subsidizing fossil technologies. 137 billion euros. That's really a lot of money. And this money is needed in developing new technologies, in fostering the renewable energies, in developing, for instance, a high-speed railway across Europe that you are proposing. But currently, this is just a matter of distribution. That we as a society, we fund fossil technologies, and we do not have the money to fund the technologies of the future. And this is wrong, and it has to change. Currently, every year, it's only 6 billion euros that were invested, 8 billion euros that were invested into renewable energies. Imagine that, and imagine what you could be doing if this money would be freed up. So there's a lot of important things happening right now on the European level. We are discussing them, and of course we are negotiating them with the member states, and they are not, they don't want to be as progressive as these suggestions from the European Parliament. But these are current fights, and they go on, and we need you also to get engaged into such kind of fights in order to foster and bring about the renewable age earlier than later. So what is happening this year on the European level? I think it's really important. We have the Fit for 55 package, and that's basically opening up all of the relevant climate and energy legislation that we have. It is about the emission trading scheme, about the CO2 price. And I think it's important to always think about, when we think about who pays actually the price. That's an important question to ask all the time. Who pays the price for the climate crisis? We know that 1 ton of CO2 is costing the society currently 180 euros. 1 ton of CO2 costs 180 euros to the whole of the society. But the actual cost of emitting 1 CO2 is not 180 euros, it's actually much less. So who pays the price? Who pays the rest of this? It's the whole of the society. So we have to get a price actually that makes polluters pay as much as they destroy in the emission trading scheme. That's important, and I think it's also important to get the money and make and create the architecture to really phase in the decarbonized industries, the renewable energies that we need. And this also needs a lot of money, and there can be money is there if we have a high CO2 price. I don't want to take it too long. Just one thing, what is important. I'm not sure whether I missed it, but I think if we think about Europe and we think about energy, we have to think in some kind of prioritization. The first priority is energy efficiency. If the energy we do not use is the best energy, we don't need to use it. So we should be putting energy efficiency first. The second is renewable energies. Well, there's different kinds of studies that show that we can go 100% renewable energy already by 2030. The biggest polluter, the biggest CO2 polluter in Europe is coal, is lignite coal, and we can easily and early get rid of it. It just needs the right investment and the right early investment, and this needs to happen soon. There is a lot of discussion about bridging technologies and a lot of discussion about blue hydrogen and how blue hydrogen is saving us all. Don't go into this trap. Hydrogen is really important, but hydrogen will not be the big bridging technology. It can only be a bridging technology if it's gas-based hydrogen, and we should not go into gas-based hydrogen. We should go directly in the renewable energy world in the transition. And now it's the last point, and I think it's important. And when I started, I was pointing a picture which is a little bit terrible, and we are all doomed. But I think what has happened, and also maybe it's a little bit a comment to the cultural change. We are in a different world right now. The US is going climate neutral. China is going climate neutral. Japan is going climate neutral. Europe is going climate neutral. And the question is not now, well, how big of the burden is it to become climate neutral? The big question right now is who is the first in becoming climate neutral, because those who are the first, they will also be the ones who supply the products for a climate neutral world. And if you look into the digital, well, in the last industrial revolution, which was the digital revolution, it did not happen in Europe. And I think it's important that the decarbonization industrial revolution happens in Europe. I think this is something that is absolutely it is absolutely important for our industry, for our economy to survive. So we need to be first in this climate neutral world. And I think the way how we should approach it, not as kind of a big burden that we need to do in order to save the world, but it's something that is absolutely crucial. First, because we cannot allow the climate crisis to happen, but second also because this is about the future of our jobs. The future jobs, they are green, they are decarbonized, or they are not there. And therefore we need to be first and fast. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mr. Bloss, for the enlightening presentation and summing up what the European Parliament is doing. An utmost inspiring quote was that we are not future leaders, but leaders now. And I think that it sums up the three speeches perfectly, that, you know, I hope also the audience has picked up on that. And that, you know, especially an active civil society will be able to achieve change, and that this change must be today. All right, so now we will take 20 minutes for a Q&A session. As I've mentioned before, we are accepting questions via the Menti platform. So just let us just post that link in the chat again. Helena, if you could do that, please. And otherwise, if there are questions already, you can use the raise hand function, and we will unmute you and just, you know, state your name and then pose a question. I think that we had very many interesting points made. We've had various insights from a company, from EEA, an association, and we also had points from an institution, so the European Parliament. So I think that we'll just wait for a second to see if anybody has posted any questions. Let me just refresh. Otherwise, I see that there are no questions yet and that nobody has raised their hands now. All right, we have some hands raised. I invite Francisca. Francisca, if maybe Helen. All right.
Yeah, thanks so much for all the super interesting inputs. I was wondering about a point that you made on engaging and taking civil society along in the process. I think all three speakers mentioned this, and especially to ensure a just transition as well. I think my question would be first and foremost targeted at Johannes, because you said many citizens are worried that politics will not do this fairly. And so I wonder, as E.ON, if you also see a role in citizen engagement, or even in driving or pushing governments a little bit to set up citizen fora or citizen assemblies on climate, like it has been done in some EU countries. Thank you.
Yes, I would. I think this is a time for true town halls. We talk about a fundamental change in society. This cannot be enforced by any parliament alone. It needs to have a broad debate on city squares or virtual town halls. And that can be orchestrated, and it ought to be orchestrated, because I don't think society is totally united on it. Today, we are all, let's say, we are all on the same square. But we should not forget there's a significant part of society who is not buying in. A lot of populists from the right, from the left, see it different. And we saw what happened in America, and it's still a totally divided society. And therefore, if we don't have the buy-in, a broad buy-in from civil society, I don't think it's sustainable. And to bring some disagreement in, I could subscribe for a lot of what Michael said on energy efficiency, on renewables, on being a front runner on decarbonization for Europe. I would say I totally disagree, for example, that this is a square for courts. If you delegate that to the courts, say, they have a constitutional right to sue your government for priority, you take it away from the town halls. You set a single priority and try to enforce through one kind of elite, lawyers, courts, something that needs to be negotiated in civil society. So I clearly would say I disagree on that. And also, I obviously I cannot follow without help how you get to 180 euro. But what I can is, if you would have 180 euro, I could square what it would cost, what it would change in costs for a lot of people. And that again, leads to a social issue. We saw it with the yellow vests in France. I tell you, if you translate 180 euro into costs of gasoline or diesel or what else, I can pay it. I have no issue personally to pay it.
No.
I would know that a lot of people would have. So I think we need to think the change, all the things to the end and see what it means. And therefore, I believe in a broader involvement and a proper debate, even if it takes some time. I don't believe in the courts, although I'm a lawyer, but save me from the courts for fundamental issues. We are in a democracy and we are not in an enforced elite society where just parliaments or courts decide. So I agree to disagree.
All right, thank you so much. Now I see that there are more hands raised and that there are also questions on Menti. So I guess it just takes a bit time with this technology to travel all the way to little Ljubljana. But we'll do it this way. So I'll be accepting the next 3 hands raised so that one after another you will be able to ask your questions. Then we'll have the answers round, and then I'll go on to Menti for the next round, and then we'll return back to Zoom. So I see that we have the raised hands with Benjamin, Fons, and Noel. So if you could, Benjamin, please ask your question first, and then Fons, you may follow, and then Noel, you go third, and then we will have the answer round. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I am Benjamin. I am from France, and I'm actually in Germany. I was part of the Young Europe Ambassadors, and actually I would like to ask Mr. Le Boss about the EU leadership in the fight for carbon neutrality, especially because we talked about the general movement in the world with big leaders taking action, if we can call this real actions. But actually, I would like to know, what do you see as the main issues and why it's taking so much time to take real action and powerful actions? And also, I understand that you are involved in the lawmaking of the climate law at the European level, and I would like to have insights about one of our proposals, which is about the consistency of the EU regulation, especially taking the case of the common agricultural policy that is ending up being supposedly a policy that should respect the other ones, but in the end, which is not respecting the farm to fork policy or biodiversity plans and all of this. So I would like to have your insights, please. Thank you.
Fons, please feel free to unmute.
Yes, Fons Jansen here, 25 years from the Netherlands, just graduated in biotechnology. I was myself active at the Dutch Climate Agreement. Like, I literally participated with a young professional foundation in it, which I see very much lacking at the sectoral policies of the European Green Deal. But I'm an ambassador of the European Climate Pact. However, for me, the European Climate Pact still feels like a hollow shell. And I was wondering to the speakers who knows about the European Climate Pact, how you see this, how this really can accelerate the action across various levels on city, provincial, national, and European level to get action involved, but also have the synergy between policy making and action, and to increase this feedback loop to improve our sectoral policies.
Thank you. And Noel, if you could just ask your question, please, and we'd also like to see you if you could turn your camera on.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So thank you. So my name is Noel, and I'm currently part of United Nations Youth Association in Albania. And I actually have 2 questions, but I keep them super short. So firstly, how can teenagers who are under 18 and don't have much political power get a wider influence and be more active on this kind of politics that are currently being thought on or talked by different politicians. And this is a question for everyone who wants to respond it. How do you agree that us as a generation should get more political power at the point that we can at least affect even a small percentage on the political divisions and choices that are being made? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for all three questions. Now, I ask the keynote speakers if they're, perhaps Mr. Bloss, would you like to go first, just because I think Benjamin's question was.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, yeah, why is it taking so long? Well, this is a really good question, and you wonder why it would take so long. But I think it fundamentally is because the political pressure to change was not as high as the kind of interest to stay. And this equation it has to change. It's as simple as that. But there are vested interests. I mean, it's basically those who make money with fossil fuels will not make money with fossil fuels anymore. And those who will make money with like decarbonized technology, they don't exist right now, but they exist in the future. So we have a problem. So we need to and this is where politics comes in. And I think we need to kind of make this equation equal by pressuring that still there should be no subsidies, for instance, for the fossil industry anymore. And I think this works. I mean, this is this basic democratic function of our system is there, because we see that in 2019 there was basically this green wave. There was young people on the streets in many places in Europe, and what it actually resulted in the European Commission coming up with the Green Deal. So it works. There is feedback. But is it enough? That's the question, because of course now this is the beautiful words of von der Leyen, which says this is the Europe's man on the moon project, but then actually it needs to be translated into concrete action. It was also said by Fons, like what does it mean for this concrete action? Is it enough in these concrete actions? And there is currently where we are having the discussions, and we also have the fights. So that sometimes, like as you said, Benjamin, in the common agricultural policy, it didn't work. There was like the common agricultural policy actually got worse instead of getting better. And that's also because apparently there was not enough pressure from the one side, but more pressure from the other side to continue like this. There is no even, like climate indicators in the common agricultural policy, maybe something that we can actually change afterwards. But until now, actually, it's a little bit, well, the decisions have been made, and it's a lost thing right now. And now this is the implementation on the national level, so you can improve it on the national level, but on the European level, basically that was a failure. And then you can say, like, I mean, this is always nice words. No, I mean, politicians like to say that. I like to say, we have to have coherency. But apparently, of course, there's no coherency in that, because the agricultural policy, which is one of the big sectors for emissions, does not contribute to our objective to become climate neutral until now. So this is a big problem. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. Also, like how do you say? It's a little bit a question. Also, the answer to Noel and Fons. This. The climate pact is important, and it's important to have these participatory projects. But when you say, like, how do we get more political power for the younger generations, I think it's also something that power is always something that is not really given to you, but it's taken by you. So it needs to, you are the actor, you are the subject of this thing, and you need to also, ask for it, take it. Because it will not be just given to you by someone else, but you need to take it. But I think you have any reason to an argument to say why you actually need to be listened to, because the decisions that are taken today will affect you much more than maybe the others. So there's every reason for you to say, look, it's important for you to listen to us, and we actually demand that you listen to us. And I think it's a little bit similar to this, how can teenagers under 18 get more attention? I would say lower the voting age to, for instance, 16, because I mean, I don't see a reason why it's 18. And if you lower the voting age, then also you get politicians or the political system being more focused on trying to also take care of the interests that younger and teenagers have. I think the 180 euros challenge I answered in the chat. And I mean, well, the question is really like, what is a democracy? But a democracy is a parliament. Look, this is, I think, that what happened in 2019 is that a lot of young people said, this election for the European Union is the climate election. And we will make every election from now on a climate election. And I think this is the way kind of they actually became really powerful and were setting the debate. And now we have these debates in the parliament, and the majorities shifted a little bit, and I think that's great. So in a parliament, actually, we are the beacon of democracy, and together with the member states, we make the decisions. This is the political system right now. Of course, if we do it wrong, then we need to be criticized by the people, and this is happening. We are criticized a lot, and that's important. But I think it's important that at least until now we say like decisions are being made as in our constitutions it's set up, but it doesn't of course mean that we do not listen to what the people say, of course. But that's also the feedback function of parliamentarians. They go to the town halls, they listen to people, and they then understand, okay, what is their interest, and they need to fight for it. When I'm going to, actually it's so interesting, when I'm going to school classes, a lot of people tell me you are not doing enough. When we went for 60% as the European Parliament, and we thought, wow, 60% CO2 emission reduction until 2030. This is the best we ever. It was like, no, there was nothing better than this. And the Fridays for Future people and most of the younger people, they were commenting and said, look, this is not enough. So this is, I think, this is the feedback that I'm getting, at least for this. And I think it's fair to say that then I need to or somehow represent this. And the question of courts. Yeah, this is for me a question of like what kind, I mean, rights are like the essence of politics and of our democracy. So if you have a right to a healthy climate and a right to a healthy future, of course, you can challenge this. You can say, look, you should not have this. And I accept it. Maybe I should not have it. But this is something, I think this is happening right now, this debate. And I'm sure when we look in the year 2050, the right to a healthy climate will be normal, because everyone will understand that you will not be able to enjoy your right to a...
I'm coming to them, sorry. 20 seconds so that we can give also the floor to our other keynote speakers and collect more questions. Thank you. All right. Well, if I could invite Cathy, please, if you could shortly deliver your answers.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, I think this issue around influence and political power, I mean, I would relate that back to what I said about making stronger use of this concept of intergenerational equity and ensuring that, you know, that this is properly evaluated when we think about responses and solutions, because as I said, I don't think it's getting the emphasis that it was truly intended to have when we think about sustainable development. And then looking at some of these other aspects about delay, like coherence with CAP, synergies between policy and action and things. I think it's what I was referring to when I was talking back about societal transitions, and in that it's not just about what we want to do more of, to scale up, to accelerate. It's also about putting equal emphasis on what we need to stop and what we need to phase out. And here you're into the whole realm of subsidies. You know, phasing out environmentally harmful subsidies has been a very long-standing policy objective with very little progress. Things like shifting tax bases from labour to resources, again, long-standing, little progress. and getting prices right in terms of internalizing externalities. I mean, all of these things, everybody says them, but actually doing them is not really happening. And because you've got incredible opposition to change. So these are not just from vested interests, but they relate to our industries, our identities, culture, all of these broader aspects, which makes them quite resistant to change. And so I'm not sure there is a silver bullet or one particular action, but I think it's also important to think about what can happen at a European level and what level of engagement is also needed at country level. Because essentially a lot of these decisions happen in the council, and there it's member states. So when we look at the opposition to CAP, yes, of course, what came out of the parliament was not really the direction that you'd want that to go, but also opposition to change is happening all over the place, which is why I think it's incredibly important to have real engagement at national level and trying to influence that, you know, as well as the European, because it operates in both.
Thank you so much for your brief answer, and I invite Johannes, if you could please elaborate.
Thank you. I think you could rightfully describe the agricultural policy as a scandal in the context of climate. And also I agree a much faster phase out of lignite would be an absolute necessity, and it's absolutely possible. So we see a number of things that are hard to square with anything. But where was the young generation then raising the scandal? And that leads me to, I agree with, I concur with Michael, that power is there to be taken, not to be delegated. Just Germans believe that you can organize a revolution from the top. Typically, they happen a little different. They happen because people try to grab the power. So I also don't think lowering the voting age to 16 will do the trick. Engagement does the trick, engagement. And if you're 14, 15, 16, you can work, you know, with young Greens, with young Conservatives, with whatever you like. If you engage, you engage. And if you see the engagement level of the younger generation in the UK vote, in the US, in Europe, people above 60 use their right to vote much more actively than people at the age of 18. So you need to engage your generation, and nobody can do it but you. You need to reach out and engage your generation. Otherwise, all the forces that will continue to do the agricultural policy and the lignite policy will continue to do so, because that's how democracy works. So engagement is the trick. And engagement, the pact can be part of engagement, engaging in young organizations and NGOs on jobs. That's the trick. I learned even from my job and through my career that formal power is much less important sometimes than just activism. You can grab power by just engage in a lot of things. So that would be my call. Just don't complain. Go for some change. Engage. Be better engaged than the older generation, and thus orchestrate and name scandals when you see them. And don't just complain about 55, 60, 62 and a half. It's about starting tomorrow and changing things tomorrow, and not just you know, numbers in the air, because I think change needs to happen now in very concrete policies. So that would be my call. And still, you know, if you lose a battle in a democracy, you lose a battle, and then you need to accept it. And the path of change sometimes is slower in a democracy, as I said. But if it's done right, it can be much more sustainable than if it's enforced from the top, because tops sometimes change, as you saw in the US, and it can go this way and it can go also the other way again. And therefore, build a broad coalition and don't rely on trying to enforce things in a small coalition. Build big coalitions, engage. That is what I believe needs to happen.
Thank you so much, Johannes. So we've concluded this first round with live questions. Now I would just like to go on to Menti and collect a couple of questions from there. And especially now we've talked about the engagement of youth, but on the other hand, we have a question here. So it's one thing to be active, but how do we ensure that young people are then properly embedded in corporates or organizations and associations? Because too often youth are confined to non-impactful roles and are not given ownership. And I will now collect just 2 more questions so that we have another brief round of answers. So could the European Climate Pact network make a significant improvement in accelerating execution of the European Green Deal? And the third would be, how do you see a bottom-up approach challenged by the fact that climate change is an intertemporal issue in which investments need to take place today, but payoffs are a matter of the future? So these are the 3 most liked questions on menti.com, and perhaps we change the order a bit. So Cathy, I invite you to the floor. And let's have a brief round of answers so that we may then conclude.
Okay, I will be very brief. When it actually, it's the last question that stuck more in my head because I've heard that first. And I think, I mean, this, when I can think about this in terms of EEA and what we do, I mean, thinking about how we really, actually, could you just quickly recap those 3 questions?
Of course. So first one was, did you ask me to recap them?
Yeah, the last one, just to make sure I understood.
The last one is, how do you see a bottom-up approach challenged by the fact that climate change is an intertemporal issue in which investments need to take place today, but payoffs are a matter of the future?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously that is some of the things that we've been doing is we've been trying to think about how policy and stuff is made in these types of circumstances. And often, you know, what we need to do is pay more attention to really how we make decisions as well. So how people make decisions, how people evaluate risks, how people discount things into the future, all of that. So in the same way, you know, when we talk about science, when we talk about things like some substituted climate change, we tend to be talking more about like natural science, when actually we need to pay equal attention to behavioral sciences, to psychology, to the social sciences, which help us understand why people don't make decisions, why they discount this future returns, why they see it as less valuable, because all of these play into, politicians are just people. You know, we just make decisions, people make decisions in all sorts of ways. So I think what we're trying to do is make sure that if we want to have evidence-informed policy, that when we are clearly recognizing that things are political decisions, that we try to also ensure that the evidence that we provide to try and support and inform those decisions takes into account these kind of, it just goes beyond natural sciences to try and bring in some of these factors as well, because I think trying to understand our behavior and how and why we make decisions can often help us provide the kind of evidence that can support a better outcome or a more sustainable outcome.
Thank you so much for your brief answer. And I give the word now to Mr. Johannes.
Yes, technology always difficult. I don't think that you know, any generation will get, you know, its guaranteed piece of the power. That it just doesn't work that way. The 60-year get 50% or 30%, and the 20 get that. So formalized equity doesn't work. But I think there's a rush for the young. We have a very smart, very much smaller young generation than the one that now goes into pension time. So every organization, every corporate wants young talents. So I think it's much easier than you think. If you engage, if you just grab, I think the power is on the road. You just need to grab it, and you need to be willing to sacrifice some interest and be willing to build coalitions. So I don't think anybody will give it to you once more, and it will not be formalized to you. You need to work for it, like every generation, I'm afraid. And the this problem of timing is nothing uncommon. That's what every entrepreneur faces all the time. You invest into something and you hope for the return in the future. Yes, sometimes it goes faster, but a lot of investments happen for 20, 30, 40 years. So I think entrepreneurs are used to get returns later. So there are 2 things where I concur with with Michael, independent of the level of price is always doing something. If you price pollution, then it will be squared into the investment decisions today. No issue. The other thing is, I think the market has changed and people may not even see it. The ESG topic is that topic in the boardrooms today. It is the absolute #1 topic. For a long time, it was just ticking the box. Yeah, we do a nice report on sustainability. Someone somewhere writes it, and nobody is truly too interested. Today, the investors, Wall Street, London, Frankfurt, Paris, are bringing it to the top of the agenda. So this timing issue is forced by investors because investors worry to invest into fossil fuels of the past and never see the return. So there is something happening and you can all again support that. So I think a lot of things play in the cards. But again, it takes the engagement, like you engage personally, but you have to broaden your coalition. So thank you once more. And I think obviously we can just touch the surface of some of the debates. But thank you once more for inviting.
Thank you so much, Johannes. And Mr. Bloss, I invite you now, and let's try to be brief.
I try. And thanks really for the interesting debate. I enjoyed it. I'm not trying to ask you for a revolution, but I think the democratic system that we have, it's already so good and beautiful and so nice. I mean, I will go in 1 hour and I will have to speak with citizens and I try to engage them. And this is like the place to be and where you can actually really change something. And if you're able to convince people, so do that. As Johannes said, it's there. Young Greens in Germany, they get a lot of people on their list to go to the parliament now. Maybe you can think about this. I think there was a question about the European Climate Pact and how can you make it, like, how can you make these things effective? Actually, when I compare the suggestions that you made with the suggestions, for instance, the citizens' councils in France made, the citizens' councils in France, they were much more ambitious. You know, they were speaking about banning flights and about writing the right to a healthy climate into the constitution. And that sparked a debate. It doesn't mean that it will actually become the truth, but I think you can be very bold and very ambitious with your demands, because if you like write, sorry to say, but if you write like efficient, balanced, and yet ambitious, that can mean a lot of things. But if you kind of go a little bit more bold, you can make people discuss stuff. So then when like, yeah, on the rest, I agree that, I mean, we have some problems in terms of the climate, and this is currently a lot the energy sector, the coal sector. And it's a question for me also about distribution. Where do we invest? Do we invest now to build new CO2 and hydrogen pipelines, or do we invest in isolating the houses of people? That actually creates much more jobs, and that makes people pay less for their rent. And that's equally efficient for tackling the climate crisis. So I'm much more in favor of helping the many with getting efficient isolated housing than, for instance, building new gas pipelines. I think we have to also ask these distributional questions: who is benefiting? And I would like to benefit, go very efficient, but then benefit the many. And for instance, just the last point, we have lost 100,000 people in renewable energy jobs in Germany. Nobody's talking about this, but there's a lot of jobs there, and there's there is a lot of jobs in this new world, and we should be reaping this future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, now, before we conclude this panel discussion, we would like to take a group photo for our social media, because this is the only way that we can keep memories now that we're virtually online. So if you guys could open your cameras, whoever is comfortable with being on the European Youth Parliament social media. And I ask Helena how we're doing with the picture. Should we smile now or 30 seconds more? No, right now. All right, everyone smile. All right, I hope we got it. Okay, well, thank you for your smiles. And I hope that with these smiles, we'll also keep in mind to be bold and to dare to ask for change, to see willingness in risks, which can be seen also as opportunities, to be engaged, and to remember that we must distinguish between what we need to do and what we need to stop doing, which I think that sums up also what our amazing keynote speakers have said. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Sorry that we're running a bit late. It got quite heated there for a moment, but that is exactly why we're here, to have a intergenerational discussion, interdisciplinary, and yes, thank you so much. Now, Federico will tell you a bit more about how the breakout session will go. And to the keynote speakers, we'll now go into small rooms if you haven't got the time to stay with us. Thank you so much for taking the time for being here, and sorry we got a bit over with the time. And yeah, Federico, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, for your excellent moderation. And thank you also to the speakers. We're sorry we're running a bit late, but I guess it's still worth to ask the people that are still interested to discuss in the breakout rooms. And I would personally also like to meet you. So you're now invited to reflect on the previous discussion, and for I think around 10 minutes, and you will be automatically assigned to the different breakout rooms according to your preferences. So we group some few topics together, and in each breakout room, there will also be a facilitator waiting for you, and that will guide you through the session. So Elena, if you could split the people. And once again, the main objective is to express your feedback, connect with the people, and discuss on the visions of the young Europe ambassadors. So I hope you will be still back. So see you in 20 minutes. 10 minutes, I guess. So see you later.